Okay, so why do we keep having these massive financial crises? It feels like every decade or so, the entire global economy just teeters on the brink only to get saved at the last second. Today, we're going to dive into the hidden force that actually drives this crazy cycle.
I mean, just think about it. You had the global financial crisis in 2008, then you see all this banking turmoil in 2023. It's a pattern, right? A boom, then a bust, then a giant bailout, and then, well, a few years of calm before the whole thing seems to start all over again. It really feels like we're just caught in this loop.
So, what is the culprit behind all this? It's this powerful, kind of hidden force called moral hazard. Now, it sounds a little academic, I know, but trust me, once you get it, so much of the completely bizarre world of modern finance is going to suddenly click into place.
All right, let's get right into it. The absolute core of the problem is this simple question. What happens when you can take a huge, massive risk, but someone else has to pay the price if you fail? At its heart, moral hazard is pretty simple. You're just way more likely to take risks when you know someone else is going to cover your losses. It's kind of like having really, really good car insurance. Are you really going to be as careful about where you park? Probably not. Now, just imagine applying that exact same logic to trillions of dollars in the financial system. That is where things start to get really dangerous. The economist Paul Krugman put it perfectly. He said, one person makes the decision about how much risk to take, while someone else bears the cost if things go badly. And this is so key. This isn't about blaming so-called evil bankers. It's really about a system that makes it perfectly logical, even rational, to gamble with other people's money. And if you look at the run-up to the 2008 crisis, we saw a perfect textbook example of this in action. The whole banking world shifted away from the old, kind of boring way of doing things to this new, incredibly profitable model. Just look at this contrast. The old way of banking? Super simple. You made a loan. You kept that loan on your books. So your big incentive was to make good loans, right? Because if they went bad, you were the one who lost money. You had skin in the game. But with this new originate to distribute model, banks made their money on upfront fees and then immediately sold the loan and all of its risk to somebody else. All of a sudden, the incentive wasn't quality anymore, it was quantity. Just churn out as many loans as you possibly can. Whether they're good, bad, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so we've got these warped incentives happening at the individual bank level. But how does that spiral into a problem that threatens the entire global economy? Well, that brings us to this famous idea of too big to fail. This is all about financial firms that are so huge and so interconnected that regulators basically believe their failure would just crash the entire system. And because of that, there's this widespread belief that the government will simply never let them collapse, no matter how badly they mess up.
And because everyone, and I mean everyone, believes the government will save them, these giant firms can borrow money way more cheaply than their smaller competitors. Investors are happy to lend to them at lower rates because, hey, they see it as a safe bet, one that's backed by this unwritten government guarantee. And get this. Research from the Bank for International Settlements found that this funding advantage can be as much as 3.5 percentage points. Now, in the world of finance, that is an absolutely massive competitive edge. It's like you're getting to start a race halfway to the finish line. It just allows these giants to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this subsidy doesn't just help the bank as a company. It actually weakens the discipline of the entire market. Creditors don't need to worry as much. Investors get higher returns from the cheap borrowing. And of course, the bank executives get bigger bonuses that are tied directly to these subsidized profits. The whole incentive to just be careful is just gone. So the whole system is basically primed for risk-taking. But how does it spin completely out of control? Well, it turns out that the good times are exactly when all the trouble really starts brewing. Yeah, there was this economist, Minsky, who had this fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying insight. He argued that the seeds of the next big crash are always planted during periods of economic calm and prosperity. Why? Because when everything is going great, people forget what risk even feels like. Minsky basically laid out this predictable path. He said we start in a safe place. He called it hedge finance. But then, as everyone gets more optimistic, we move to speculative finance, which is a lot more vulnerable. And finally, we end up in what he called Ponzi finance. And yep, it's every bit as bad as it sounds. It's basically a house of cards where the entire system depends on the price of assets just going up and up and up forever. But of course, when that bubble inevitably pops, the music stops. Asset prices start to fall, all that massive debt becomes totally unsustainable, and that realization triggers a panic. That right there, that is the Minsky moment, a sudden, violent collapse of the whole house of cards.
So what happens after the crash? Well, the typical response, while maybe necessary to prevent a total meltdown, very often creates a brand new, even bigger problem. See, while bailouts are meant to stop a total collapse, they also tie the fate of the banks directly to the fate of the entire nation. And worse, it confirms everyone's belief that the big banks will always be saved, which just sets the stage for the next round of moral hazard. It's a cycle.
To fund a huge rescue, governments have to take on incredible amounts of new debt. And this can actually make the government itself look riskier to global investors, which drives up its own cost of borrowing. But here's the really crazy part. Who owns most of that new government debt? The banks themselves. So when the government starts to look shaky, the value of all those bonds on the bank's books just plummets, which then makes the banks look shaky all over again, which means they might need, you guessed it, another bailout. It's this terrifying, vicious doom loop.
For policymakers, the incentives are just stacked in favor of the short-term fix. I mean, the political pain of a full-blown depression is immediate and catastrophic. The long-term cost of moral hazard, that's abstract, it's far away. Plus, the powerful banks can lobby effectively for a bailout, while the millions of taxpayers who have to foot the bill are just too spread out to organize against it. So the big question is there any way out of this trap? Is it even possible to manage a crisis without just reinforcing the exact behavior that caused it in the first place?
So what's the alternative? Well, one idea that's been gaining a lot of traction is the bail-in. Instead of a bailout where you and I, the taxpayers, pay, a bail-in forces the bank's own investors and creditors, the very people who profited from all the risk, to take the financial hit. It's basically a way of saying, hey, you made the bet, you cover the loss. It's all about finally putting skin in the game back where it belongs. But here's the thought I really want to leave you with. After decades of these bailouts, governments all over the world are just drowning in debt. So the next time a giant bank is on the verge of collapse, the question might not be, is it too big to fail? The real and maybe much scarier question might be, is it now too big to save?